Hello and welcome to Making Business Writing an Asset, a presentation of the elements of writing. First, some background. I have been working in publishing, journalism, academe, and teaching and coaching for about 30 years. My name is Charlie Euchner. Pause the video if you want to scrutinize it a little bit. Meanwhile, we'll move on. I've helped people to work on books, business writing, writing in government, writing in academe, the whole gamut. And now I want to help you write well as a professional. We're going to take this step by step. We're going to take a 1, 2, 3 journey into the challenges of business writing. By the way, feel free to contact me with questions or suggestions or comments. I'm always eager to help. Before we get going, here's our quick agenda. If you want to look at it carefully, again, pause the video. Okay, are you ready to get working? Let's go. First, let's talk about what we mean by business writing. What does business writing actually mean anyway? Here's the basic truth. Writing is writing. It doesn't matter what field you're in. It doesn't matter what your topic is. Good writing requires solid fundamentals, mostly great sentences and paragraphs. Different kinds of writing simply have different topics, audiences, vocabulary, and goals. So in other words, writing is writing. You need those core skills, especially sentences and paragraphs, and putting them in the right order. But once you've got those core skills, you simply adapt it to the topics, audiences, and so forth. So for example, sports writing talks about the world of games. Pulp fiction explores murders and deception and the detectives or investigators who figure it all out. And business writing? Well, that's all about how companies and markets work, their goods and services and strategies, and the debates surrounding them. And yes, like other professional fields, business writing has its own technical vocabulary. But remember, go back to the beginning, writing is writing. Get that clear. Get all the sentences and paragraphs to be great. Get them to be clear. Get them to be as straightforward and plain as possible. And you can't go wrong. But, of course, people do go wrong. Here are some sorry statistics about business writing. So 40% of all business transaction costs, or the costs of managing transactions, is caused by bad writing. 80% of frontline workers say they can't figure out what to do after reading documents. And websites with typos have an 85% higher bounce rate than websites that are written cleanly. So if you do things wrong, the costs can be really high. And those costs are especially visible and especially pervasive in email, because that's the one thing that we all do. It's kind of a critical way that we all keep in touch with each other, both inside and outside the organization. Actually, I have a separate presentation that I will be doing soon on how to write emails in business, so keep your eye out for that. But the good news is, if you can get everyone in your organization writing better, all the good indicators will go up, and all the bad indicators will go down. Now, if you are so inclined, pause the video and jump over to the elementsofwriting.com/business-assessment. It's written there on the screen. Go over there and take a quick assessment. It'll only take 3 or 4 minutes, and it should give you a clear indication of just what you need to do to bring your business writing or your other professional writing up to snuff. Pause the video if you want to do that. Now, business professionals have 2 challenges: communicating with colleagues and others inside the organization, and communicating with prospects, clients, customers, contractors, public agencies, and others outside the organization. Again, the basics are really similar. Good sentences, good paragraphs. clarity of expression, a little bit of energy in the prose. It's all the same internally and externally, but there will be a different vocabulary and a different kind of way of addressing and understanding the audience depending on who your audience is. Now, when a lot of people think about business writing, they think of technical writing, and that's often what business writing is. Here's a quick list of some of the more technical documents that people write in business. As always, if you want to take a closer look, pause the video. But just as often, professionals write for broad general audiences. In fact, some of the most important writing you'll ever do is to cultivate relationships with potential allies, customers, and others who don't speak your lingo, who don't have your insider knowledge. So you need to speak as an expert to non-experts. Technical or not, writing matters every day on all kinds of pieces, from small to large, from emails to memos to proposals to reports, RFPs, web copy, and then major reports like annual reports or research documents. Here is the key to it all, the sentence. Ernest Hemingway was once asked how he deals with writer's block. Well, he said, whenever he got writer's block, he stood up, walked over to the fire, looked into the fire, and told himself, quote, all you have to do is write one true sentence. Write the truest sentence you know. So then I would write one true sentence and then go on from there. It was easy then because there was always one true sentence that I knew or had seen or had heard someone say. So here's the bottom line. If you can write a great sentence, you can write anything. If you can write a great sentence, you can write a great paragraph. And if you can write a great paragraph, you can write a great section. And if you write a great section, you can write a great whole piece. But here's the deal. If you can't make that first step, if you cannot write a great sentence, you cannot make it up the other steps. Here's my ideal for good writing. It's clarity. You should make it as easy for a reader to understand, to see what you are trying to say, as it is for someone to look out a clear window. Consider that the window pane theory of writing. Now, of course, style matters too, at least sometimes. Sometimes it is important to see the writer, or the organization for that matter, to see their personality in the documents. Style can show the attitude of the writer, whether it's positive and upbeat, or wild and crazy, or detailed and precise, or colorful and provocative. But the most important thing is that real style comes when you get in the habit of showing the reader something they find intriguing. Give the reader something to get surprised by. Give the reader insights. Give the reader revealing details. Make the reader kind of sit up and take notice. That happens with the content of whatever it is you're writing about, expressed as clearly as possible. Okay, so we're now talking about clarity, right? So let's get direct here. Let's get really specific. What do we mean by clarity? What are the essential ingredients of clarity? It's got 3 levels. On the first level, it's great sentences and paragraphs. Sentences and paragraphs are the alpha and omega of clear writing. As Hemingway knew, a good sentence puts you on the right path to clear communication. Once you can write one clear sentence, you can write 2 and 3 and more. And then you can cluster them together into paragraphs. The key to a great sentence is always to state clearly and almost always right away who does what. You got to say it right away. You can't make the reader guess. Say who does what as soon as possible. Sometimes you want to set it up a little bit with a little bit of context. After this happened, then that happened. Or when they gathered in this place, that happened. Or in the afternoon, that happened. But whatever you do, get to the point of the sentence right away. Who does what? Think of it this way. Subject, verb, object. SVO. Subject, verb, object. That is the essential part of the whole thing. Almost always use simple words. Sure, you can use longer words and foreign words and technical words, but use them only when they convey your ideas best, when they get at something that really matters, precisely, specifically. Don't use fancy words to show off. The goal is to communicate, not to advertise how smart or learned you may be. Now, the best words are physical. They show action with a punch. They evoke the senses, seeing, hearing, tasting, touching, smelling. And they are precise. They say exactly what you mean. Here's what Mark Twain once said about picking the right word. He said, "The difference between the almost right word and the right word is really a large matter. It's the difference between lightning bug and lightning." Being close is oftentimes not enough. You have to be specific. You have to be precise. Your meaning has to match perfectly with your intent. Now, do this, don't do that. In business especially, and in academia and in government, we have a tendency to use fat and gloppy words like terminate and utilize and incombustible and ascertain and so forth. But it's much better to use simple words, nickel words, that everybody can understand. So don't say terminate, say end. It's one syllable instead of three, right? Don't say utilize, say use, and so on. Pause the video and look at these words. You've seen them all, and you see how gloppy and pretentious and confusing even they can be. Pause the video and take a quick look. When you do need to use technical words, define them before you use them. You can sometimes do this in a little sidebar, or you can do it in a kind of block quote, or you can do it in boldface. You can set the definitions apart if that's what you need to do to avoid glopping up your text, glopping up the writing that you're doing. But whatever you do, you need to define whatever technical terms you're using so that the reader knows exactly. Once you've defined a technical term, it becomes, in a way, not technical. It becomes an ordinary word. But you have to define it first. Never assume that the reader knows exactly what you're talking about, unless, of course, you're talking to fellow specialists. Even then, though, sometimes defining the word is really important because people sometimes have different ideas about words that they think they know the definitions of. So it doesn't hurt to take 8 words, 12 words, whatever it is, to remind the reader of what such a term means. So clarity on level 2 means providing a clear path from start to finish. And here's how you think about it. Imagine your reader just getting your text, right? They're looking at your web copy, or they're looking at your report, or your memo, or your email, whatever. It's just arrived in their mailbox, or you've just given it to them. What does the reader know at that point when they just receive the document? And what do they need to know at the beginning of the whole process? If you know that, you're going to be in great shape because you're going to know exactly what the gap is between what they know and what they need to know. So then you go to the end of the whole process. Once the reader has read whatever you've given them, what do you want them to know at the end? What additional information do you want them to have? It's the difference between what you want them to know at the end and what they know at the beginning that determines all the steps in between. So think about writing as that kind of path between knowing what they need to know minus something and whatever it is that they need to know to fill that gap. Here's another key idea about taking that path from start to finish. You need to focus. You need to obsessively focus, in fact. You might not know it when you start writing a document, but by the end, you have to know exactly what the one point is you want to make. Even really long books, long reports on complicated issues, they all focus on one idea. And by the time you finish your draft, by the time you've finished your kind of polished version of this thing, you need to know what your one idea is that you want to convey. You need to make sure that every step of the way you provide information that helps support that one idea. Here's the thing. If you lack focus, if you don't have that one idea, you will confuse the reader, and you will also confuse yourself. You know, when I say have one idea, I don't mean just kind of hammer away, repeating the same thing over and over again. Anytime you talk about a complicated topic, or even sometimes simple topics, there's lots of ideas that get involved in the discussion, but they all need to be oriented toward the one main idea that you're talking about. Your one main idea has to be kind of your North Star, the thing that guides you throughout the whole process. And by the way, that one idea has to be related to that new information that you want to provide the reader. You know, when we talked about what does the reader have at the beginning and what do you want the reader to have at the end. That one idea should be the key element in getting the reader from the beginning to the end. Okay, so here's some examples of some kind of classic books on business, politics, and history. And each one of these pieces makes a single argument. These books provide lots of different angles and lots of different information on that one idea, but they really focus on just one idea, period, end of story. And the idea is that if you can give them a kind of simple way of looking at the world, a new, fresh perspective, or a frame for looking at the world, and that frame can be encapsulated in one idea, then you can give them a tool for figuring out whatever it is that they face in their world. And you provide extra information, you provide historic information, theoretical information, backup information, arguments, counter-arguments, and so forth for that one idea, but you are still focusing on that one idea. So, for example, Peter Thiel in 0 to 1 talks about startups and how the best startups, the ones that are going to make you rich, the ones that are going to change the world, they're the ones that do something that nobody else does. And so they can kind of take over the whole market. They're not like battling every day for a tiny little sliver of the market. And so they're giving the market something totally unique so that people can only get it through that one company. And that's the real road to not only riches, but also to innovation. Robert Axelrod, in The Evolution of Cooperation, talks about tit for tat. And by that he means that people respond to what other people do. If I do something mean to you, you do something mean to me. If I do something generous to you, you do something generous to me. And Axelrod argues that a series of positive acts leads to cooperation. So cooperation is a matter of a whole series of positive acts and reinforcements rather than any kind of directed or centralized kind of control over the way people interact. So it's something that's not enforced except for at the very local level. It's something that evolves over time, hence the title, The Evolution of Cooperation. Exit, Voice, and Loyalty, Albert Hirschman talks about how whenever an organization is in decline, there's basically, or whenever anybody is unhappy with an organization or a product or even a country or political party, they have three choices. They can either leave, they can speak up, or they can hold back and just be loyal and see what happens. Three choices and three choices only. Very simple, single idea. And Jared Diamond, of course, in Guns, Germs, and Steel, talks about the importance of geography in political, economic, and social development. Anyway, enough about that. One quick thought on that, though. Your one idea, you should subject the blurb test to it. You know how the New York Times bestseller lists, they not only list the title, but they also give a good, 12 or 15 word blurb describing what the book is about. You should be able to describe your idea as if your book or your report or even your email is in a bestseller list. So pause the video if you want, look at these things and see how concisely these books are described, which just shows how simple the overall idea is. It's how they get developed that gives them real power. Okay, we already talked about this, so we're just reinforcing it. You need a real path from the beginning to the end. You have to know where your reader is at the beginning of the journey, and you have to know where you want to take the reader by the end of the journey. I propose that you adopt what I call the Christopher Columbus principle, right? When you're starting out a project, you don't necessarily know where it's going to end up, but you have to have some idea of where you think it might end up. And so you get all the skills, you get all the information, you get all the kind of tools that you need at your disposal to take the journey. And you know, when Christopher Columbus took his journey, he thought he was going to India, and he ended up in quote unquote the New World. He didn't get where he intended to go, but he got someplace pretty terrific anyway. And the way he was able to do it was with his incredible skills as a seaman. And so think of yourself as Christopher Columbus. You're setting out on a journey. You need the skills, you need the tools, you need the information, you need everything that's essential for taking a good literary trip. If you don't end up going where you think you're going, that's okay. You go back and in later drafts of the piece, you adjust it so that you take the reader to a clear journey that you can tell them about at the beginning. So think about the journey as a story. And Aristotle wrote this famous book 2,500 years ago called The Poetics, where he describes how narrative works, how drama works. And he said that all stories really have just three parts. He called them the beginning, middle, and end. But for our purposes, let's call them world of the story, rise in action, and resolution. And in the world of the story, we get presented with all the characters, all the issues, all of the kind of environmental descriptions and so forth, everything we need to know about the journey ahead of us. It kind of locates us so that we know exactly how the whole process begins. And then at the end of the world of the story, at the end of part one, a clear challenge is identified. Then we move along this arc into part two, the rising action. And here we deal with different aspects of the challenge moment by moment until finally at the end we come up with some kind of solution. And it's what Aristotle called the denouement, where we wrap things up. So that's really the shape of everything that you'll ever write, beginning, middle, and end. You introduce yourself, or you introduce the readers to the world of the story, the characters, the place, the ideals, the values, the challenges at the beginning, and then you show the characters dealing with the challenges one by one, more and more intense as they go, and then you show the solution at the end. Now this is not just for stories, of course. It's also for abstract writing. So in this case, the world of the story might be a problem like global warming or unemployment or immigration or nutrition, where we state a challenge, we make clear who is involved in the challenge and what the issues are, and then in the middle of the whole process, we deal with different aspects of the challenge until we come up with a solution. So Aristotle intended the narrative arc to be about storytelling, but it really applies to everything that you'll ever write about. Okay, a couple other points about level 2, the clear path from the beginning to end. It's really important not to rush. All too often, writers feel like they have to explain everything all at once. They cram their ideas together, like sardines in a tin. But here's the deal. You need to take your time. Explore just one point at a time. Now, here's an example that I got off of Citizens Bank's webpage. Pause the video and read this web copy. Now, it's actually not bad. I'm not picking on it because it's so bad, but it can be a little better. This version just crams far too much information into a small space. So pause the video, read this, and then come back and we'll see if we can improve it a little bit. Okay, so here's one way that we might rewrite that web copy. Again, pause the video and read this new version. Now, when you look at this thing, see how much lighter it is. See how much easier it is to move from one line to the next, to the next, to the next. There's a bunch of ideas here, actually the same number of ideas as you find in the more dense copy. But rather than rushing through it and creating all these long, convoluted sentences, practically all of the sentences here are short, and they just move you from point to point to point to point. It's kind of like walking down a path that has, a different piece of slate stone for every step. You just do one step at a time. And it's a lot easier to take in because there's a lot more sentences, but they're shorter. So each sentence, you kind of get an idea, you can swallow it, you can absorb it really easily, and then move on. Whereas in the previous version, it's really hard to absorb all the ideas in those sentences. So let's do a quick comparison between the thick and gloppy version and the light spread out version. Okay, let's do a quick comparison. Okay, now the first version has 173 words. My version has 116. So my version makes you do a lot less work just in terms of the number of words that you have to read to get the same idea. The first version used 6 sentences. I used 11. By definition, then, the first version has really long sentences. They average about 28.8 words per sentence. My version only averages about 10.5 words per sentence. So it makes it a lot easier to work your way through. The key thing here is the number of sentences. If you have a lot of short sentences, it makes it a lot easier for the reader to get through each of them, absorb the idea, move on to the next one. Read, absorb, move on to the next one. Read, absorb, move on to the next one. Okay, let's move to clarity level 3, the ease of skimming and reassembly. Now, here's where the writer needs to be modest, because the truth of the matter is that writers have big egos. And the truth of the matter is that not many people will read what you write. And that's a little disappointing for a lot of writers, but it's just a reality. Most people are going to skim whatever it is that you give them. And so, that might be a little deflating, but it's just the reality of the thing. And so you have to make whatever you write as skimmable and as easy to kind of jump around as possible. And one way to do that is to provide very clear signposts, some indicators along the way that show, that kind of tag different ideas as you go through the piece. So for example, if you're reading this article, this report that I wrote for a think tank in New York City, this is a report on manufacturing in New York. And if you're interested in just like 3D printing, then you're going to notice a discussion of 3D printing at the beginning, and then there's discussion of other stuff, and then you're going to look for the subheadlines here that talk about 3D printing. And that's how it should be. If your thing is 3D printing, you should be able to go find what you want and get out. You shouldn't have to read every word to get to whatever it is you're trying to learn from the report. But also, if you are interested in reading the whole thing from beginning to end, these little signposts make it easy to orient yourself and to say, okay, where are we in this thing now? Okay, we're still on 3D printing. We haven't gotten to the stuff about food, the food industry, or we haven't gotten stuff about fabrication. Okay, I guess that comes later. It just makes it easier to kind of navigate your way through the thing. The other thing that's really key for skimming is taking out all of the technical and statistical information, at least as much as possible, from the text, because people kind of get lost and overwhelmed when you just throw number after number after number. But when you format it into a chart, it makes it easy for the reader to say, okay, what are these numbers all about? What are the indicators? What are the subjects of it? And in the chart in the middle of the screen, for example, the focus is on the growth in the food manufacturing employment and the change in recent years in major cities in the U.S., Phoenix, San Jose, New York, and so forth. And so you're able to just kind of work your way through and make sense of the data as you see fit as the reader. And you need to give the reader the ability to step out of the text. You shouldn't be kind of forcing the reader to read through a lot of dense prose in order to get the basic facts that they need. So the prose should be about explaining big ideas and giving examples and a little bit of narrative. And then when you have a lot of statistics, it's always better to set it off to the side. Also, it's oftentimes best to set off complicated definitions off to the side. So I did a separate little sidebar on what is 3D printing. And that meant that I wouldn't lose the kind of narrative arc of my discussion of 3D printing in New York just by giving the reader background information on what is 3D printing in the first place. So it made it easier for the reader to skim, look for what they're looking for, not get caught up in technical discussions that kind of take them off the topic. So again, it's the ease of skimming and assembly that's so important. Now, there's something else that this modularity does, breaking a piece down into a bunch of different sections and then labeling them with these subheads. When you have a bunch of these fragments and when you label each of them well, it makes it easy to edit the thing later on. It makes it easy to move the pieces around. It's almost like refrigerator magnets, and you create sentences out of the words that are on the refrigerator magnets. In a way, you're doing the same thing with these little sections or these little fragments in a report or in a letter or in a proposal, whatever it is. You make it easy for yourself to kind of move stuff around. You might say, makers of all stripes, that should go in the beginning of the thing, and the New York 3D printing scene should be moved to a whole different section. Whatever it is, move these pieces around, and it makes it much easier to do it if they're all labeled so that you can kind of glance at them and see all the little pieces that you're dealing with, like refrigerator magnets on a fridge, and move them around as you see fit. Okay, let's change topics here. I want to give you a very simple rule that you should be able to learn in a matter of minutes. And you should be able to use in a matter of minutes to dramatically improve your writing, regardless of whether you're an old pro or someone who is not so hot or not so professional or not so experienced, whatever. The golden rule of writing should make it easy for you to kind of level up whatever level you're at right now. So let's begin with Dr. Einstein. Albert Einstein said that everything should be made as simple as possible, but not simpler. So what did he mean by that? Simplicity is really important. If you're going to remember an idea whenever you need it, if it's simply expressed, like in Einstein's case, E equals mc squared. But you can't make it more simple than it should be, or else it's going to lose its kind of explanatory value or its directing value. So at any rate, keep everything as simple as possible, and I promise you the golden rule of writing is really simple. So here it is. Part 1 of the golden rule, make everything a journey. Part 2 of the golden rule, start strong, finish strong. Okay, let's look at each one of those in turn. Let's start with part 1 of the golden rule, make everything a journey. Whatever you're writing, sentence, paragraph, section, whole piece, Your job is to take the reader or the characters or the ideas from one place to another different place. Everything in writer is a journey. And your job is to know where the reader is at the beginning and where you want to take them. And when you know the beginnings and the endings, it makes it easier to do the steps along the way. Let me give you an example. I showed you some passages from this report I did on manufacturing. Here's the basic outline of that report. I start in the beginning talking about basic issues of manufacturing in New York City. So I'm kind of orienting the reader so that we're all in the same place together when we begin this journey. So that's the problem. And then at the end of it, I want to provide some solutions. I want to say, okay, look, if you want to deal with this problem, here's some things that you can do, right? So I want to take them from a statement of the problem to some answers to deal with the problem. And in the middle, I provide the analysis of three major sectors in manufacturing: food and food services, 3D printing, and fabrication. Okay, so the basic structure of my piece is a journey. I take the reader from one place, from kind of the knowledge that manufacturing has disappeared from the city, and with it, high-paying middle-wage jobs, to the end where we have some ideas about how we can revive manufacturing at least a little bit in the city. And that's all based on the middle steps that we've taken, describing the issues and challenges in these three parts of the manufacturing sector. So if you want to pause this video and look at this quick outline, you can do so, and then we'll get back to business. So one way to think about the journey is to think about the first and last words in whatever piece it is that you're writing. So here are the first and last words of this report that I wrote on manufacturing in New York. Okay. A number of years ago, I was writing a book about the civil rights movement. And I had done lots of research. I interviewed 120 or 130 people. I did a lot of work in the library, archives, listening to audio tapes of old interviews, looking at videotapes of news coverage and so forth. So I did a lot of work, but I hadn't done a lot of writing yet. And I was kind of stuck and overwhelmed. And then I figured out a way to make the job a whole lot easier. What I did was I wrote the first paragraph and the last paragraph for a whole bunch of chapters. And I figured that if I knew where I was beginning each chapter and I knew where I wanted to leave the reader off at the end of each chapter, that the steps in the middle would be that much easier to do. And it turned out to be exactly true. It worked like a charm. So one thing you might do once you know enough about whatever it is you're writing about is you might start by saying, okay, where do I want to meet the reader? How do I want to kind of introduce the topic to the reader? How do I want to kind of say, okay, here's our problem, here's how we have to figure it out. And then write that last paragraph also. And then once you have the beginnings and endings, it becomes really clear, or at least easy to figure out, what the steps are from the beginning to the end. You might want to pause this and look at these passages. Or not. Okay, let's look at part 2 of the Golden Rule. Now, I love this because it makes it easy to do part 1. It's kind of a shortcut in a way, because you don't always have the ability to map out, or you don't want to always take the time to map out every level of writing. You don't want to come up with a complete map of every sentence, every paragraph, every section, right? And so you need a simple little rule of thumb in order to get everything right in the journey. And here's that rule of thumb. Start strong, finish strong. And bridges and brackets in the middle. We'll talk about that in a minute. But first of all, let's talk about what do we mean by start strong. By start strong, it's very simple. Just state clearly who's doing what. Remember I said before, subject, verb, object, SVO? It's kind of that. Say who's doing what or what's happening as soon as you possibly can. Usually do it right away, like starting with the first word. Sometimes you need to provide a little context, right? Like, after this happened, comma, so-and-so did so-and-so to somebody else, right? Sometimes you need to set it up, but whatever you do, say who does what, subject, verb, object, right away. Start strong. That's what that means. And when you do that, when you start strong in every sentence, every paragraph, every section, and every whole piece, your chances of going off the road, your chances of getting lost and going off on various digressions goes way down. If you say who's doing what right away, you're pretty much 9/10 of your way to writing good sentences, paragraph, and sections. So what does finish strong mean? Let's talk about that. Well, when you finish strong, you are clinching the point. You're kind of concluding the idea that you started with at the beginning. Or when you finish strong, you also might be offering the reader a powerful image or question that moves things forward, right? But usually what finish strong means is I introduced the topic early on, here's how it all works out, okay? We'll get back to this in a second, but let's talk about the middle. In the middle is what I call bridges and brackets. A bridge is something that takes you from one place to another, right? And when you cross a bridge, you take one step at a time. And so think of your writing, whatever it is, sentence, paragraph, section, whole piece, as a series of steps that get you from the beginning to the end. That's what a bridge is. A bracket, on the other hand, is context or references that the reader might need, might want, or might not to understand whatever it is you're saying. So, for example, you might say, the budget deficit increased from X to Y, right? That's a simple sentence that starts strong and finishes strong. The budget deficit increased, that starts strong. And then finish strong is from X to Y, right? So you're starting by saying clearly what the topic is, and you're finishing by concluding the idea of that construction. The budget deficit starts strong, increased, and then finish strong from X to Y. But if you want to provide some context, you might want to put that in the middle. So you might say the budget deficit, comma, according to the Enterprise Institute, comma, increased from X to Y. That gives the reader a little bit extra information to understand your argument. The reader might know something about the Enterprise Institute or the Brookings Institution or the AFL-CIO or whatever the source is that you're using. And by giving the reader that little extra information, you give them the opportunity to assess the numbers that you're giving them. They might say, oh, that's a biased organization, or they might say, oh, that's a reliable organization. But what you're doing is you're kind of completing the idea by saying where you got the information. And most people kind of skip over that stuff. They kind of glide over middles, but it's there if you want it. Anyway, so let's look at this again. Start strong, finish strong. Start strong by saying who does what or set it up. Finish strong, clinch the point or propel things forward with a powerful image or question. And then bridges and brackets in the middle. I know this is a lot, but I'm going to be giving you a tool in a minute that makes it easy to do this. So let's take it on. Okay. Here's a little trick that if you do it, and you got to do it for it to work, but if you do it, it will transform your writing. So I call it the landscape view. And here's what you do. Very, very, very simple. Whenever you're writing a document, use the landscape or the horizontal setting on your document. Okay, and you know how to do that. It's indicated in that little graphic on the right, right? You go to page setup, and then you click the right side of the orientation, and that puts it in the landscape or the horizontal setting. Just like this screen is horizontal, that's what your page is going to look like. Okay, so you use the landscape setting. You write just one sentence per line, no matter how short or long the sentence is. You single space each sentence. So you have sentence number 1 is on line 1, sentence number 2 is on line 2, sentence number 3 is on line 3, and so on. and then you double space between each paragraph. It's really that simple. And here's what it ends up looking like. And you've seen this already, right? It's that web copy that I rewrote from the Citizens Bank webpage. Okay, so what we're doing is we are using just one sentence per line. Sometimes the sentence goes on to a second line, but usually just one sentence per line. Now, what does that do for you? Think about that. Why would I have you, A, use the landscape view, and B, write only one sentence per line, and single space, and space between paragraphs? Why would I have you do that? Okay. Before you answer, I'm going to give you another example of this. This comes from Ernest Hemingway when he was a journalist, and he wrote this article about bullfighting in Spain. Okay. Pause the video and read this thing. So, what does this landscape view do for you as a writer? Here's the main thing. It makes it easy to check the beginnings and endings of sentences and paragraphs also. When you use kind of traditional block formats, where you'll have one sentence period, then the new sentence period, then the new sentence period, and so forth, and then you only indent at the end of a paragraph, which could be 2 sentences, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 sentences, whatever, right? When you use that block format, it makes it hard to find the beginnings of the sentences. Now, it's not like it's a really difficult job, but it takes effort. And most people simply will not make the effort to look for the beginnings and endings of all the sentences in order to check to see if they start strong and finish strong. It's just that our brains are lazy because our brains have limited energy and limited ability to focus. So if you give them that kind of busy work, the brain simply won't want to do it. And so by using this line-by-line format, you make it easy to see the beginnings of every sentence, and you make it easy to see the end of every sentence and the middles also. And so that way you can kind of check line by line, did I start strong? Did I start strong? Did I start strong? And then you can check every end of a sentence. Did I finish strong? Did I finish strong? Did I finish strong? And this takes a lot less energy. And by focusing on these kind of key rules of writing, start strong, finish strong, bridges and brackets in the middle, by focusing on these key essential requirements for good writing, you start to burn into your brain the skill of writing great sentences that start strong and finish strong almost without effort. It takes a lot less effort the more you do it, and the more you do it kind of consciously, line by line. So here's a quick model of the landscape view. And you see it's easy to check if you start strong, easy to check if you finish strong, and so on. Now, here's where email, which is a big pain in the neck to most people, here's where email can actually be your greatest asset when you're trying to improve your writing in your company. Think about that. Email could be the most important thing you do in your company, not just for conveying ideas, but also for learning how to write well. Because when you write, you write email every day. A lot of people write 20, 30, or even more emails a day, right? So that gives you an opportunity to practice the golden rule of writing. Start strong, finish strong, start strong, finish strong. And nobody cares about the format that you use in an email. The only thing that people care about when they get an email is if they can understand what it is you're trying to say, right? So if you can get everybody in your company or your organization to follow the golden rule in their email, writing in that company or that division, that department, whatever, writing in that company will dramatically improve in literally a matter of a week or so. If everybody does it, and if you understand this concept of the golden rule, everybody's writing will be dramatically better in no time flat. Now, when you're doing documents, ultimately you have to give, you have to turn in a document that uses the traditional block format like this, right? And people don't want to look at the landscape view when they get a document, right? If you're turning in an annual report or a memo or a description of how to do this or that, people want to see, for whatever reason, this more traditional block format, right? So what you need to do is figure out a way to easily go from block to landscape and back and forth. Block to landscape, toggling back and forth, back and forth. And if you go to theelementsofwriting.com/toggle, you will find a very brief video describing how to do this in Word documents with almost no effort whatsoever. Okay, so let's move on. What are the benefits of the landscape view? Well, one benefit, as we've already discussed, is it's easy to check whether you start strong, finish strong in sentences, paragraphs, sections, and whole pieces. Another thing it does is it helps you to check the sentence length, right? Take a look at this piece written out in the landscape view. You can tell right away that there's a bunch of short sentences, then a bunch of longer sentences, right? Now that's important because it's a lot easier for the reader to get into a tempo if you have a variety of sentence lengths, short and long. It's also easier if you use more short sentences than long sentences. So what the landscape view is it not only helps you see if you're starting strong and finishing strong, but it also checks to see if you have a good mix of short and long sentences, and if not too many of your sentences are going off really, really long. And it also gets you to focus just on writing things sentence by sentence. And that's really important because, as we said before, the most important unit of writing is the sentence. And if you focus on writing a great sentence one at a time, and the landscape view kind of guides you to do that, if you focus on writing a great sentence line by line, then you're going to become a good writer, and it almost is automatic. Okay, so we need to wrap up. Okay, wow, a lot of time has passed. We're like 52 minutes into this thing. Okay, let me just give you a few closing thoughts. Okay, I'll just knock them off real fast. Okay, thought number one, brainstorming. Buy yourself a cheap notebook. I get these cheapo things from Staples, and they cost $2.99, I think. I've seen them on sale for 99 cents. Get one of these cheap composition pads that's flexible. You can roll up and put in a purse or a bag or your back pocket, whatever, and take it with you wherever you go. And capture as many ideas throughout the day that you think are worth capturing. Researchers tell us that we have 50,000 to 70,000 thoughts a day. Most of those thoughts are kind of not worth keeping, but along the way, a bunch of them are. And if you get in the habit of capturing your interesting and worthwhile and provocative thoughts, you're not only going to capture those ideas and have them to use later on, but you'll get better and better at kind of sorting out what's worth paying attention to and what's not worth paying attention to. Okay, so that's tip number one as we move toward the close. Tip number two, whatever you write, it's really just going to be a collection of fragments, right? Whenever you write, especially longer pieces like major reports or proposals or articles, just create one section of it at a time, one fragment at a time. You know that joke about, how's it go? How do you eat an elephant? Just one bite at a time? Well, the same goes for writing. Every piece that you write, say more than 1,000 words or more than a couple pages, is really a collection of smaller pieces. So write those smaller pieces, each about an aspect of the big topic, and collect them and then organize them like those refrigerator magnets that we discussed earlier. Okay. Point 3 as we move to the end, be like Mike. And in this case, Mike, we're talking about Michelangelo. Here's his masterwork, David. Michelangelo once said that creating art like this is what you do is you get a big block of granite and you cut away everything until you find the essence. And that's where you find that masterpiece inside the block of granite. Whatever you write, you're going to have a lot of stuff that you want to chip away. It's very important that you edit, chip away all the extraneous stuff, all the extra stuff, all the stuff that gets in the way of a clear idea, beautifully articulated. So be like Mike. Item number 4, as we move to the close, murder your darlings. There was a British writer and teacher named Sir Arthur Quiller Couch, and he talked about this phenomenon that, when we're writers, we get really attached to what we write, especially when we write something that's really, really good, right? But if it doesn't belong in your final piece, you need to get rid of it. And he said, murder your darlings. This particular passage on the screen is a section that I wrote for my book, Nobody Turned Me Around. And I really loved it. I thought it kind of captured something fun about the March on Washington. But in the end, I decided it had to go because there were other ideas that were more important. And so I murdered my darling. I loved this little section, but I cut it out of the book. It never appeared. And you have to be really kind of brutal with yourself or brutal with your writing in order to get to that masterpiece inside the block of granite. Okay. Finally, let's talk about what next steps there might be. If you're intrigued, you might want to take some extra steps to improve writing in your business. You can start here. There's a couple of books online. Go to Amazon and either get them both. The Elements of Writing, which is the comprehensive guide to writing in all fields. And you can also get What's Wrong with Business Writing, which focuses particularly on, guess what? Business writing. Or you might want to book a seminar for your organization. And I've done this all over the country. And in 1 or 2 days, you can really learn enough to transform writing from the top to the bottom of your organization. Here are some of the topics. I'm going to breeze through, but you can pause if you want. This is 2 slides of topics that we explore. But we can add topics. We can, tailor this to your company and its needs. So here's topic list number 1, and here's topic list number 2. I also consult with companies to help them figure out a plan for improving writing across the company, because going to a seminar is usually not enough. There usually has to be some kind of follow-up. There has to be a company-wide or at least a department-wide strategy to get everybody on the same page. And so, some very quick consulting can turn things around real fast. And I do that. And then finally, something else you might want to think about. This might sound wacky, but I think it's a really great idea. You can do a total makeover of writing in your organization, starting with the techniques that we've talked about here and the other techniques that we develop in the seminars to write everything that you write. But wouldn't it be great to have a writing center in your organization, particularly big corporations that have a lot of people who are writing a lot of stuff, where you can go for tutorials, where you can go for some consulting advice, where you can figure out what the problems are and attack them. And a lot of people have discovered that there's real value in having somebody designated within the organization to be their kind of writing center, someone who helps people do it for themselves rather than just, taking whatever other people do and trying to make sense of it. And you might check out this article from the Harvard Business Review about that. Well, we've reached the end. I hope that these last 59 minutes and 19 seconds have been worth it. But you really can make business writing an asset. And if you're interested in exploring some ways to do that, send me an email. There's my email address right there. I'm Charlie Euchner. It's been a pleasure to be with you. And I hope that your writing gets clearer and more dramatic as the days go on. If it does, if you can really make writing one of your core skills everything will go better in your organization. So, again, thanks for your time and attention, and so long.